Hello. It is a privilege for me to share with you my educational philosophy. I believe that as educational leaders, it is essential that we know what we believe and why we believe it. Our belief system is what shapes the outcomes and the successes for our students. In 2010, the then Minister of Education for the province of Alberta, the Honourable Dave Hancock, worked with the steering committee, and together they produced a document entitled Inspiring Education, a Dialogue with Albertans. This is just the front page. I've posted the PDF link on my website for you to review the entire document, which I consider to be my educational Bible. This document was created as the result of hundreds of consultations with a cross-section of stakeholders across the province. They shared their views about education. These stakeholders included students and parents and grandparents, teachers, principals, administrators, small businesses, corporations, education, post-secondary institutions, and community service groups. Basically everybody. And as they shared their views and their views were being consolidated, the government realized that there had been quite a shift in the views about education over the decades. For several decades, we had been governed by a piece of legislation called the School Act, and the government thought that it was time to create a new act which would more accurately reflect the views of Albertans. Well, they created the Education Act, and it received royal assent in 2012. But then a new government came into power, and sadly, the time to proclaim this new piece of legislation was allowed to lapse. I am so very passionate about education, and these two documents to which I've just referred, Inspiring Education and the Education Act, which is still sitting on a shelf somewhere, they articulate and encapsulate my beliefs very, very much. The following are just a few of the points which help show how they support my philosophy. In the Inspiring Education document, there was a list of 4 very distinct contrasts in the way that education had been administered to the way that it ought. For instance, under the School Act, education was focused on the school when it should have been focused on learning and education. And that was why there was a difference in the names from the School Act about schools and the Education Act about education. The old system was centered on the system, where it was felt that the new system should be centered on the learner. The old system was centered on content, where it was felt that the new system should be centered on competencies. And the old system was centered on technology to support teaching, where the new system found that technology should be used to support the creation and sharing of knowledge for the benefit of the student. I have been very, very pleased to sense that there's been a shift in the way education is administered. I hope that the trend continues. So in the Education Act, there was a beautiful, beautiful preamble, very, very different from what you would find in the School Act. And it had 8 philosophical statements and 6 responses by the government. These are a sample of the philosophical statements which resonate within me. Whereas, education is the foundation of a democratic and civil society. Whereas, education inspires students to discover and pursue their aspirations and interests and cultivates a love of learning and a desire to be lifelong learners. Whereas the role of education is to develop engaged thinkers who think critically and creatively, and ethical citizens who demonstrate respect, teamwork, and democratic ideals, and who work with an entrepreneurial spirit to face challenges with resiliency, risk-taking, and bold decision-making. Whereas education is a shared responsibility and requires collaboration, engagement, and empowerment of all partners in the education system to ensure that all students achieve their potential. And finally, whereas the educational best interest of the child is the paramount consideration in making decisions about a child's education. In addition to those, I also believe that children need to be encouraged to be self-motivated rather than motivated by manipulative and punitive measures. I believe firmly that an education system must serve the students and that the students should not exist to serve the educational system. I believe that learning starts with and is dependent upon healthy relationships, relationships with family, relationships with educational leaders, relationships with peers, and relationships with the surrounding world. I believe that every behavior presented by a child means something, and it's up to us to find out what is that something. And finally, I believe that whatever is going on with the child, it is never his or her fault. I believe that the role of every educational leader is to bring out the very best of each individual student, regardless of the system's standards and the desired outcomes. As I wrap up, I will leave you with one of my favorite quotes by author Susan Schaefer Macaulay in her book, For the Children's Sake. Let us really and truly be courageous. Much of what follows goes against the daily pattern of our lives. It is interesting to read about, but it will remain as so many words on a page if we cannot do what we know is right. One day we will stand before the Creator. Were we willing to give, serve, and sacrifice for the children's sake? This is what I believe.